Yes. Good evening. I'm on the mobile setup again today because I'm on holiday. So, well, not really. I'm on just a day off, which is like a holiday for me. So, any problems, let me know. If you can hear the sound, say yeah. I know the picture's not that great. I think it's probably out of focus. The camera's probably out of focus. So it doesn't matter. You don't need to see. You don't need to see me anyway. You just need to get the shadows. Just get the feel of a person sitting in front of you talking. I've brought the travel book with me. Where is it? The dog-eared travel version. There it is. Who we got in today? Ralph Hexam, Trevor Wright, and The Only Way Out is in. Just the crew. So unless there's anything important to talk about, I don't think there is anything to. There was something that came up actually on Twitter earlier, and it was by a Caucasian man reposted something to do with it's Tony Atwood believes the out of the box thought processes of people on the autism spectrum will be some sort of. It's basically it says, is Asperger's syndrome the next stage of human evolution? So, bearing in mind everything we've gone through so far in the book, and the Asperger's is the autistic spectrum was a redefinition of clinical psychosis, or clinical psychosis. And that was probably because they didn't want parents to have to tell people that their children were psychotic because of all the connotations that came with that. But ultimately, that's what the autistic spectrum is the reclassification of people with mild to severe psychosis. So to try and suggest that it's a step in evolution going forward is actually, as you'll know already from what we've read, is actually a step backwards. But what else would you expect from so-called scientists who are one of the aspects of psychosis or the psychotic mind or system A, and that they would then sing the praises of other system A people as the future of evolution, not some sort of past that we've managed to surpass as human beings, and that they want to drag people back into this the idea that you're outside of nature, that you're in a flight from nature or flight from your nature. And that's what these these quote unquote out of the box ways of thinking are. This the only way out is in the same people who think robots are cute and funny. Yes, exactly. The same people who will say that you are a collection of cells. Even if you are a human, you're nothing but a collection of chemical processes. But robots are alive. Yeah, those people. They're the ones trying to say that, Asperger's, that's a good thing. Everyone should have Asperger's. The ones who have got it, they should be treated as special in some way. Not as, pre-human. Or in denial, I suppose you'd say. They're people who are in flight from nature or in denial. But anyway, So yeah, that was an interesting little piece that I saw. So the last bit we left with was we're still in the Lost World section, which is section 4 of the book and chapter 10, I think, or 11 or something, which is Old and New Men, chapter 10. And we ended last week on the suggestion that Neanderthal was fundamentally inward turning, preoccupied with the self, as the self is defined by Gooch, whilst Cro-Magnon was outward turning and the manifestation of ego. So these two within us, obviously the ego and the self, and the last line was, while Neanderthal built no cities of stone, he perhaps built cities of dreams. And this touched on something that D2017 is in the chat. Hello, D. This touched on something that The Only Way Out is in mentioned before about did they destroy their ritual buildings or something, or what remained of them or something, I think we was talking about. And so Gooch mentions there about cities of dreams, so that their world was an inner world rather than a world of they didn't have to show, they didn't have to build things to show what they was about. Everything was internal. So let's carry on. Page 345. After that, 345 being the measurements of some kind of triangle. Can't remember the ratios of triangle. It may be wondered why one is concerned to venture into this area of speculation at all, and what benefit is thereby derived. One of our reasons is because art, as are many other forms of higher behaviour, is very much a marriage or synthesis of the personality factors we have assigned to these two kinds of men. That is, of content and form, of imagination and technique, of conception and execution. Freud, among many others, has expressed the view that art is the unconscious made manifest, the forbidden made available and acceptable to consciousness. While this next analogy is neither an exact nor a flattering description either of the unconscious or of the nature of art, it is as if we see in art the capture and caging of a wild beast who may then be safely brought into our zoos and or our sitting rooms. Broadening the discussion very briefly at this point, it will be recalled that in previous chapters mention was made of the destructive or self-protective power of consciousness, due to which unconscious contents arrive in consciousness dead, as plankton removed from its element loses its iridescence. Art, that is, the formal qualities of art, permits unconscious materials to arrive in consciousness substantially still in their own magical forms and very, very much alive, indeed immortal. In classical art, which leans more towards System A, form, the degree of control, is paramount. The rules or conventions, be these the dramatic unities of classical Greek tragedy, the Alexandrine of classical French poetry, the formality of classical architecture or whatever, are wholly obligatory. In romantic art, however, which stands closer to System B, that is, the unconscious and the basic instinctual drives, the essential ingredients are inspiration, intensity, and passion. Form is a tiresome, wearisome nuisance, a hindrance rather than an aid to creativity. Yet, under the extreme forms of both viewpoints, i.e., too much form or too little, art ceases to exist, degenerating on the one hand into mere technique or technology, and mere emotion on the other. The proposal of this book, to revert to the matter immediately in hand, is that at a genetic level, no matter in what other way, cultural, psychological and so forth, Neanderthal contributed the basic inspiration and Cro-Magnon the basic form, not simply to art, but to our civilization. So we're on part 3 of this chapter now. Modern man, I have suggested, is to be regarded as a hybrid or mongrel descendant of two fairly well-marked varieties of early man, the Paleoanthropic and the Neanthropic. I have postulated fairly continuous crossbreeding between these two broad varieties over the millennia since their inception. Without this circumstance, one may with some legitimacy suppose that the two lines would have steadily diverged past a point of no return into two quite separate species. The frequency of individuals showing mixed characteristics throughout the long period in question can be used to support the view of continuous hybridization, though this, of course, is not the only possible interpretation. Two main points are made in this section. The first is that the crossing of a well-marked A dominant variety with a fairly well-marked B dominant variety in Europe produced not merely an exceptionally vigorous but rather unstable hybrid. The second point is that while certainly neanthropic and therefore essentially A dominant sapients are now found in all parts of the world, it is proposed that some varieties of man are characterized by what may be expressed either as a greater admixture of B dominance or a more unified mix, this arising perhaps from the fact that the neanthropic element in those parts did not undergo the particular sharpening which Cro-Magnon is assumed to have undergone in Europe. Before taking up these points, it is as well to remind oneself of the yet wider background to which all of this relates, of the fact first that System A and System B are also sex-linked. That is, that System B is normally more active and dominant in the female, System A more dominant in the male of the species. This holds true within all other divisions, Paleoanthropic, Neanthropic, or whatever. Let us not also forget, above all and at all times, that each and every one of us individually is at once both a System A and a System B, both a striving ego and a receptive self, both a male and a female. Finally, let us not put entirely out of our minds, though its relevance is not crucial at this particular juncture, the fact that the two systems are age-linked, System B being more dominant in the child and System A more dominant in the adult. This too applies within all other divisions. First, the suggested instability of our hypothetical hybrid variety. Reverting briefly to an earlier terminology, it is clear that no real problems are likely to arise in connection with a uppercase b lowercase a or an uppercase A, lowercase b profile, always providing that the psychological dominance coincides with the physical sex of the individual concerned. Problems arise, at least in our society, where the inappropriate system is behaviourally dominant in an individual physically a member of the reverse sex. Problems of another kind arise, however, when the personality profile uppercase A, uppercase B is present. When, that is, both components are strong or near equal in strength and are both therefore potentially dominant. One proposes that the crossing of Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal produced a relatively high incidence of that very situation, of the personality profile capital A, capital B. By way of analogy, one may liken the personality of modern or Western man to a sports car. The souped-up engine of that vehicle results in high levels of performance, but a high rate of breakdown, rapid wear of components, and dangerous and difficult-to-handle side effects. The analogy, a critic might say, is all very well, but where is the precise evidence for the alleged instability, and what precise forms does it take? To attempt an answer to that question would involve us in very considerable problems of definition, however, and lead us a long way from the central issue here. Therefore, our reply is only a further metaphor. Just as when one used to look at the balance of payment figures for month after month during the late 60s, which, it seemed, were always under the pressure of special factors, strikes at home, strikes abroad, revaluation of someone's currency, the purchase of military aircraft, the holiday season, and so on, one nevertheless ultimately came to the conclusion that the balance of payment situation was basically and somehow unsound. Something like this happens when one looks at the history of mankind in the last few thousand years. One can argue climatic factors, economic factors, population pressures, this precipitating cause, that precipitating cause, yet when all these points have been made, one is left still with the impression that a majority of mankind's difficulties are self-produced and self-discovered, that the constant factor in every equation is man himself and his somehow flawed constitution. Perhaps one solid index of man's homogeneity may be suggested, namely the many forms of polarization in modern society of which the political parties are one. On the second question, the matter of the relative strengths of System B in various parts of the world, we can be somewhat more forthcoming. One takes the opportunity first of meeting a possible objection. Has one the right to be speaking in a simplex manner of only two varieties of man, when it is so widely agreed, for instance, that the racial spectrum in the world today offers a very confused picture indeed, and where the notion of any kind of racial purity is rightly regarded, except by cranks and other disturbed individuals, as complete nonsense? One can make 2 points here. The first, deriving from Darwin's Origin of Species. Chapter 1 of his book, entitled Variation Under Domestication, discusses the frequently observed phenomenon that individual animals and plants under domestication vary much more markedly than do those same organisms under nature. When we look to the individuals of the same variety of or subvariety of our older cultivated plants and animals, one of the first points which strikes us is that they generally differ much more from each other than do the individuals of any one species or variety in a state of nature. It is easily overlooked that man is himself an animal under domestication. May one then expect this circumstance to have had the same effect on his variability that it has on all other organisms? The domestication of man is not, of course, something which happens overnight. The degree of domestication increases as we approach present times. Might one therefore reasonably expect the amount of variation to have similarly increased only gradually? There are 2 points involved here. Domestication leads A, to great variation, that is, a greater range of variability within varieties, and B, also to a larger number of varieties. This then is one aspect. As we move back in time, we might expect to find fewer varieties of men and less variation within those varieties than seen amongst man today. A further line of argument is that whereas Paleoanthropic and Neanthropic man were 2 clearly marked varieties, a fair way along the road to becoming separate species, what we see in the world today are in general not more than subvarieties. What is more, they are essentially subvarieties only of the latter variety, for we should be clear that all races of man living today are Neanthropic, with the possible exception of the Australian Aborigines and 1 or 2 other groups. But even though Aborigines do show some Paleoanthropic features, most of their characteristics are essentially modern. What we are discussing is in fact only the varying extent to which the claimed admixture of the Paleoanthropic characteristics can be detected in otherwise modern Neanthropic man in various parts of the world. One is not ultimately to stop short at the mere theoretical discussion of possibilities, and in particular of the possibilities suggested by this book. One final section contains proposals on how the hypothesis involved can be fairly simply investigated by the straightforward statistical treatment of some relatively simple data. For our present purpose, however, mankind is now considered in terms of 3 broad areas, or more accurately, 3 broad distributions. The names given to the 3 distributions carry here a much wider definition than they usually bear, so these are written throughout within quotation marks. The areas in question are Europe, Asia, and Africa. Europe is defined as the whole of geographical Europe, including Russia, all countries adjacent to the Mediterranean, hence also those of North Africa, and further to the east still, Iran and India. By extension, this term also embraces all people of European origins in the Americas, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, etc. Asia refers to all of that geographical continent not already mentioned, but principally China and Japan, and additionally all the native or Red Indian populations of North and South America who originally migrated to these areas from Central Asia. Africa means the whole of Africa south of the Sahara, but also includes all peoples of Negro origins in all other parts of the world. The 3 areas named constitute 3 relatively self-contained gene pools, a useful, non-emotive term. Within each of these large reservoirs are, beyond any doubt, further, relatively separate, smaller gene pools, but these are not of our direct concern. There are well-established grounds for believing that gene flow between the 3 broad areas or distributions defined was restricted during certain known geological periods in ways described below. The specialist literature is, it may be added, agreed on these points. The interpretation placed on these events here is, however, hypothetical. Direct access to Asia from the west and northwest of Europe was very largely or entirely impossible throughout the whole of the Pleistocene, that is during the last 2 million years, due to extensive glaciation. Ingress from these directions became possible around 10,000 years ago. The people of Mongolia came into being at this point. Circuitous routes into Asia through eastern India have, however, always existed. Africa south of the Sahara, on the contrary, was always easy of access whenever glaciation was advanced in Europe, and not when it was not. During those times of glaciation, the Sahara Desert was a grassy plain with an extensive system of rivers and occasional afforestation. Such was actually the situation in Africa around 25,000 BP, when renewed glaciation in Europe followed on the warm interval that had previously encouraged Cro-Magnon to move up into Europe from the southeast and had brought about, one way or another, the extinction of classical Neanderthal. After an interval of several thousand years, the climate of Europe once again gradually improved, yielding the present mild conditions of the last 10,000 or so years. As the climate of Europe once more improved, however, so conditions in the Sahara again deteriorated. By 10,000 BP, the ecology of the Sahara was not dissimilar to that prevailing today. At that point, this vast locality quite definitely no longer served as a land bridge, but was again a formidable land barrier to movement between the continents. One may assume that migration across the Sahara tended to decrease after 25,000 BP, slowly at first, but more sharply towards 10,000 BP. Gene flow between Europe and Africa is, then, a reducing quantity from 25,000 BP onwards. However, the presence of Cro-Magnon on the Canary Islands and other finds on the mainland argue some genuine traffic. Yet, either because the mixing was on too small a scale or for whatever other reason, no significant cultural advance or change is detectable in Africa as a result. Traffic between Asia and Europe, and therefore gene flow, was confined until recent times to the route passing through the Middle East and northern India and the relatively narrow gateway of northeast India. From 10,000 BP on, however, the northwest gate from Europe is open, and mixed Caucasoid Mongoloid peoples arise in Mongolia. I consider it extremely significant that there are no records of prehistoric art either in Africa or Asia. The earliest art finds in these regions date from a few thousand years BC. One can say that art is unknown outside Europe prior to 5000 BP. For such, but also many other reasons, one is inclined to regard the emergence of Cro-Magnon, followed by his merging, though not swamping, by Neanderthaloid varieties from some point of view as a purely European phenomenon. One is, of course, not necessarily arguing that no Neanthropics existed in other parts of the world. After all, Cro-Magnon came into Europe from somewhere. But it is proposed that populations outside Europe retain a rather higher proportion of Neanderthaloid genes, that they are, in short, to be regarded as including rather more individual B-dominant or rather more B-dominant generally throughout the population as a whole than is the case amongst Western Europeans. Just see if there's any comments. We got, can't believe those D2017. Can't believe those in power are fine with undoing that much history. So obviously the way that it's seen at the moment is that they say that outside of Africa, everyone contains Neanderthal genes. But I don't know if I made this point before, that they've only tested the European Neanderthal. They've only sequenced the DNA of European Neanderthal. So when they say everyone outside of Africa contains Neanderthal, 3% Neanderthal genes or whatever they say, then they're only talking about one particular offshoot of Neanderthal, which, as we've seen from the book, was, diverged from the Neanderthaloid stock 250,000 years ago or something. So they're saying that Europeans and Oriental people contain genes from that particular type, but they haven't found any other types that are, so it's possible then still that Africans contain a whole load, or all humans contain a whole load of Neanderthal genes, but the Neanderthal genes that they're that we all contain, that we all share, are from another stock of Neanderthal, and that also those genes are in, another. So you'd have to find different types of Neanderthal that go back further to be able to really make the statement that only Europeans and Asiatics contain Neanderthal DNA, because we don't really know, the whole gene, the whole sequence where it all comes from. We just know that humans have, pretty much similar DNA throughout all of them. I think there's slight variability, but even though there's only a slight variability between different, races and all the rest of it, and ethnic groups, when you think that we share something like 97% of our DNA with a chimpanzee, that 3% really does make a difference. And we share 60% of our DNA with a banana, so obviously 40% is like a fucking massive difference. And then NAP's just said Denisovan. Yeah, I don't think that that Gooch. I don't think that Denisovans had been discovered at the time when Gooch wrote this, but he does speculate that there was more than one type of Neanderthal parent that went, that made humans. So I think what he's ultimately trying to say is that there was lots of Neanderthals, lots of different types of Neanderthals. So Denisovan will just be another type of Neanderthal, and in Africa there'll be another type of Neanderthal. And that Cro-Magnon there was only one Cro-Magnon, one type of Cro-Magnon. There was only one Neanthropic parent, but there was many Paleoanthropic parents. So that's what gives the individual character to the races or to these groups in these areas. Sorry, I'm gonna have to lean forward to look at my computer. The only way out is in. I don't think DNA is everything, though. Yeah, no, I don't either. Otherwise, it would explain. It's just fingerprints. Eventually they found out that fingerprints weren't very they weren't as foolproof as they thought they were. I think it would be the same with DNA. It's just the latest way of categorizing things. Yeah, and D2017. How it is amazing how they forget how important 1% is. Yeah. Yeah, and the only way out is in. Different races have different diseases or whatever they are. We don't know, do we? Their diseases. Emotional conflicts. And what else? Relativities, etc. Yeah. Sorry, I'm having to keep leaning forward to read the computer. I should have put the computer next to me. Right, where was I? One is, of course, not necessarily arguing that no Neanthropics existed in other parts of the world. Cro-Magnon came into Europe from somewhere. They are, in short, to be regarded as including rather more individual B dominance, or rather more B dominance generally throughout the population as a whole than is the case amongst Westerners. I think we've done that bit, didn't we? Whether or not this is so, or as this book suggests, because this is so, the civilizations of those countries outside Europe, and in particular their religions, philosophies and literatures, are based upon and are contributions to knowledge 2 and not to knowledge 1. The claim then is as follows, that all peoples outside Europe and considered as a whole show greater B dominance, the dominance of self as defined, than do all peoples inside Europe, considered as a whole, these being, relatively speaking, A dominant, and showing the dominance of ego. Inside Europe, however, the greatest incidence of or admixture of B dominance is found in the following descending order amongst 1. Indian, Middle Eastern and some Mediterranean peoples, 2. The Latin and Celtic varieties, 3. East Europeans, Slavs and so on, 4. West and Northwest Europeans, and finally 5. The migrated Europeans of America, South Africa and elsewhere. Our reasons for these views are numerous. Some have already been mooted, others are now discussed. It is not seen as accidental, for example, that in Europe religion flourished and flourishes principally in India, the Middle and Near East, somewhat less strongly in South and East Europe, and least in the North and Northwest, where eventually the Protestant Reformation and later still the Industrial Revolution take place. Science and the scientific method finally emerge. The map of religion and anti-religion in Europe is largely, and too coincidentally, a map of the concentrations of Neanderthaloid and Cro-Magnon elements respectively of some 30,000 years earlier. How might one then more generally categorize or describe the proposed similarities between African and Asian behavior as a whole, together with the differences between it and European behaviour as a whole, and the similar but less marked difference which we are claiming exists within Europe between the East and South, and the West and North? System B, or Neanderthal populations, are firstly characterised by what one might term a greater willingness to admit the existence of the unconscious, a greater willingness to evoke it by various methods, and much less fear or aversion, or a pleasurable fear, to its actual manifestation. Thus, in Asia, Africa, and those parts of Europe adjacent to them, one has, or has had till recently, complete social acceptance of the use of hallucinogenic drugs, both hard and soft, the opium of China, the marijuana and hemp of the Middle East, the Indian and South American Indians, and so on, and the deliberate inducement of advanced states of possession on a whole tribe basis, e.g. by dancing, accompanied by the intake of soft, locally evolved alcoholic beverages. It is interesting in this connection to note the American Indians' delight in, and great vulnerability to, the whiskey and other hard alcohols introduced by white men. The foregoing does not, of course, apply so literally to East and South Europe, but compare, for example, the whirling dervishes, bacchanalian practice, and the use of soft drugs already mentioned. The following comments, however, are more literally applicable to all the areas under discussion. In all System B countries and amongst all these people, there is a marked willingness to accept what is, and not to search for objective causes or the means to control those causes. There is, too, a much greater acceptance of and indulgence in sexual activities, although these may be surrounded by specific taboos. This is quite unlike the total taboo that has tended to characterise Western, e.g. Victorian or Puritan societies. It would hopefully prove possible to demonstrate by a study of the legends of Asia and Africa far less unconscious fear of women, or actually terror, in those countries than is found in, say, Greek legend. It would indeed be of the greatest interest if extra-European legends should in any way show a fear of the masculine. The kind of generalised categorisation of peoples of the preceding paragraphs is one to which Jack Kerouac has given expression at various points, and which, however incoherently, is contained in all versions of the hippie philosophy. The following extract is from Kerouac's Lonesome Traveller. You just wait patiently like you always do in America amongst those apparently endless American policemen and their endless laws against, But the moment you cross the little wire gate and you're in Mexico, you feel like you just sneaked out of school when you told the teacher you were sick and she told you could go home 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You look around and you see happy smiling faces, or the absorbed dark faces of worried lovers and fathers and Mexican policemen. It's a great feeling of entering the pure land, especially because it's so close to dry-faced Arizona and Texas and all over the Southwest, but you can find it, this feeling, this fellahin feeling about life, this timeless gaiety of people not involved in great cultural and civilization issues. You can find it almost anywhere else, in Morocco, in Latin America, in Tyre, in Dakar, in Kurd land. If there is substance in what this chapter is proposing, certain and ominous corollaries follow. It would follow, for instance, that the view of man proposed by Western philosophers and thinkers, and more latterly by Western psychologists, is a view only of Western man. While this view might be wholly true of Western man, though this book is attempting to show that not even that is true, it is at very best only partially true of races of man outside Europe. What one is implying, in other words, is that Western man is in some sense a special case, and that Eastern and African man are also special cases, and Western man's social order, political system, attitudes to what is important and absolute are largely the product of local conditions, including, however, in local conditions, and here one parts company with all environmentalists who might otherwise be in agreement with this last statement, the product of the fairly recent evolutionary history of this particular variety of Homo sapiens, of his genetic makeup. It would follow from this, if true, that our attempts to interpret and explain the behaviour of peoples outside Europe, and even within Europe, say attempts to impose upon them a two-party political system, or to prevent their use of certain mild drugs, or to replace their obsolete religion and philosophical worldviews with others of a more scientific or rational nature, may be largely misguided, and in any case, quite unjustified. Naturally, it is not disputed here that there are in all of this cultural and environmental components. A society, a particular social environment, may and does encourage the development of System A or System B qualities respectively, while admitting then that the end product personality will show the effects of such shaping. The present book is nevertheless not of the opinion that such influences make after all so very much difference. In stating this, one is at variance with all those who would and do argue that what this text calls the System B way of life of underdeveloped countries is the product of some kind of backwardness, of an economic or social environment that does not give the individual a chance to become anything else, that is, to become Western man. Admitting that such situations are complex and that these people in question have so far been refused anything even remotely resembling a fair opportunity to participate on equal terms with Caucasians, nevertheless what is envisioned by the progressives does not seem to have begun to occur in the cases, say, of the American Indian or the Australian Aborigine. On the contrary, a number of observers, not all of whom are sentimentalists, have expressed the opinion that these people are psychologically starving to death. In general terms, one is prepared to say this now for the last time, to agree that environment and opportunity of course make a difference. What one maintains, however, is that neither the African nor the Asiatic, even if wholly reared in a situation of bottle feeding, no-touch mothering, anti-sex fathers, objective evaluation of emotion, etc., would ever demonstrate the degree of denial of the body of feelings that so notably characterises Western society. To revert then to the particular argument, and taking account now also of the material of earlier and later chapters, the proposition is that populations of Asia, Africa and Eastern and Southern Europe are biologically predisposed both to the evolution and the acceptance of mass solutions, such as religion or communism, while the peoples of Western Europe are biologically predisposed to notions of individual differences, rank hierarchies and rule by elites. Further distinguishing behaviours of these two broad groups will be considered elsewhere. The two types of communities which arise on these predispositions are, respectively, the System B and the System A society. These two types of society now briefly outlined are, it must be borne in mind, like the individual, a mixture of A and B elements. It is, as always, a matter of which element predominates. Yes. Very interesting. So, Trevorn, the Mayans and the races of the Americas are Asiatic, as stated earlier. I think, yeah, I mean, if you join these two together, you always get something creative out of the two that's being joined together. What I think possibly the elites are doing at the moment is trying to physically join these two things together. You know, so because they're psychotic, they misunderstand that these races are expressions of System A and System B, and they're seeing them as because they're psychotic, they're seeing them as objects. So they're viewing one race as objectively system B, and they're viewing one race as objectively system A. And their idea is that we clash them together and we'll get out some kind of new man out of it all. But that's not how it works, because all of these people all contain system A and system B anyway. And really, elites just need to look at themselves and accept their own system B, because they're in extreme denial. The psychosis has led them to an extreme denial of system B in themselves. And they're imposing that sort of that need to clash these things together to try and find that system B in themselves. They're hoping that if they smash us together with some system B people, that there'll be some kind of outcome from it. I mean, this is, on a deep psychological level. If you question Klaus Schwab, he's not going to say that to you in person. He's going to say something like, we found the solution to the race problem. That solution to the race problem is to make everyone coffee coloured. The system A society is characterized by strongly demarcated, possibly complex hierarchies within which movement is limited and subject to the fulfillment of precise requirements, the examination system of one kind or another. The System B society is characterized for its part by a relative absence of these features, by a tendency towards levelling out and equalization, a breaking down or reduction of barriers and differences, not a proliferation of these. System A rules by right, meaning strictly right of birth, though the term broadens to take in the right conferred by superior qualities and natural endowment. Thus, in the elite society, pure, the blood descendants, and only the blood descendants, indeed, only the senior blood descendant of the ruler of the is the next legitimate ruler. His claim to the title is automatic and undeniable. This element certainly is found in the nevertheless System B societies of Christianity. Christ was, for example, claimed to be the lineal descendant of the house of David and the only Son of God. Thus he fulfilled all elitist requirements. He also made such statements as, "No man cometh unto the Father except by me," a clearly hierarchical divine right attitude. This is later confirmed in the Catholic view of the priest as a central mediator between man and God. Nonetheless, despite these elements, the dominant tone of Christianity and the fundaments of its mass appeal is the fact that all men are equal in the sight of God. They are clearly not equal in the sight of the College of Heralds. England of the Victorian era offers an example of an essentially System A society in which each knew his place and kept it. A much more extreme instance was provided by Nazi Germany. Orthodox armies, not revolutionary armies, are always excellent models of what is under discussion here. Great pains are taken to ensure that the difference of position, rank and regiment are on obvious display, and these distinctions are rigidly enforced. In the System A society, B-dominant individuals are found variously as an amorphous mass at the bottom, actually below the bottom of the hierarchy, or taking refuge in the priesthood, the teaching professions, and so on, as do-gooders, poets, hermits, and what have you. Instances of System B societies, or would-be such, are seen in Buddhism, the Christian movement, communism, and the kibbutzim, or collective settlements of Israel. As noted already, Catholicism, for example, has distinct System A overtones, but even so, it sees all men as theoretically equal. Russian communism, it may also be objected, has likewise a complicated System A type hierarchical structure. 2 points can be made here. First, that at least matters such as accidents of birth are not in general a barrier to progress within the communist hierarchy, nor, as far as one can see, is nepotism extensively practiced. Second, the use of such terms as comrade and brother, plus the total abolition of hereditary titles, show at least lip service to the concept of equality. It is perhaps the communal settlements of Israel, however, which represent the purest realization of System B principles. There, all possessions and clothing, as well as land and produce, are the collective property of the kibbutz and not of any individual. In these respects, the kibbutz has close parallels with another System B community, the monastery. Additionally, all the work of the settlement, including managerial and administrative functioning, is rotated so that all perform all tasks in turn. The present-day hippie commune, again, contains many of these features. It might well be objected at this point that a great deal of equality, the slogan liberty, equality and fraternity, exists in America, allegedly a stronghold of System A, and perhaps more liberty than actually exists in Russia. Remember, this is 1972. One is, however, discussing here two very different, though outwardly similar, commodities. In Russia, everyone is a follower. In America, everybody is a boss. Thus, at the end of the last century, 80% of the American labour force was self-employed, the number since dropping to 37%. The difference can be expressed thus: in the communist state, everybody has no car, or everybody has the same car. In America, everybody has a bigger car than everybody else. It is not too sweeping a statement to say that the history of Europe, particularly of Western Europe, is the history of the ego, of the development of the ego and of elites. This is seen clearly in the nature of its cultural heroes: Hercules, Siegfried, Beowulf, Alexander, Superman, and so on. I wouldn't put Superman in there. I don't know what CHIE, the she function of these heroes is the killing of other people, be it indiscriminately or selectively. For hopefully obvious reasons, there are very few System B cultural heroes, an outstanding exception being Jesus Christ, together with the lesser figures of the saints and the martyrs. The function of the System B hero, however, is to get himself killed. This last statement is one index of the true nature of the System B hero. The whole concept of the hero is essentially alien to and undesired by the System B ethos. As far as he exists, this hero remains still one of the people. He is their property, not they his. He does not actually wish to lead. Leadership is thrust upon him by circumstances or necessity. So perhaps, O my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt, which is Matthew 26:39. Under System B, there are no individual heroes, no cult of personality. The hero of System B is the people. For the moment, the final word on the nature of the orthodox standing army compared with the revolutionary army as seen in the French or Cuban revolutions. Though there will be more to say in another connection, for the present one would like to suggest that the difference between the two types of armed forces are the differences between classical and romantic art, that is, between form and content. The Orthodox army has a minimum of passion or emotion, at least that is to say, it is consciously channeled and held in check by formalization and ritualization, in much the same way that a horse is controlled by a bridle and bit. The Revolutionary army, on the other hand, has a high charge of emotion or passion, sketchy or ragged discipline and formation, and relatively permeable barriers between leaders and men. In closing this section, two possibilities may be mentioned. One is that the number of B-dominant individuals in a population will probably tend to increase over time. Considering the general record, one finds tentative grounds for assuming that Neanderthal, as a variety, is more hardy, perhaps more fecund also, than Cro-Magnon. The survival of classic Neanderthal in the inhospitable conditions of the Ice Age, for instance, argues in a general sense for this. If this reasoning is correct, one would expect more B-dominant individuals than A-dominant individuals to survive to adulthood. Hence the fact that more females survive birth and childhood than males. This would perhaps hold particularly true under conditions of hardship or deprivation. The peasant or working class population, as already noted, has frequently, even habitually, lived under just such grim conditions in many societies. It may be that the very conditions which, in one sense, help to keep the sheer numbers of peasantry and workers in some sort of bounds, also selectively favoured the survival of B dominance. While one does not wish to seem to be overlooking the many other precipitating and causal factors involved, both social and environmental, it seems possible that the emergence of communism and socialism is, in some sense of that term, a Neanderthal backlash. I think we'll stop there. Few. I'm going to lean forward with the microphone so I can read. Ralph Hexham, were the Clovis... this looks weird. Were the Clovis people... just see the top of my head. I suppose I can try and lift this laptop up. Hold on. The whole holiday setup is a bit precarious. I think that's all right. Yeah, I got it. Yeah, that's it. Resting it on my knee. Were the Clovis people of North America Neanderthals? I think, you know what, I think you could tell by the tool culture. If you can look up the tool culture of the Clovis people, what tools they used, you can see whether they were paleoanthropic or neanthropic by the types of tools they used. I think Neanderthal tool is all stone based, whereas neanthropic tools are bone, stone, and wood. Yeah, so you can sharpen a bit of bone more than you can a bit of stone. So, yeah, but not that Neanderthal tools weren't good. They're very good. They are quite good tools. And they did use tar to hold the stones in place on the sticks. But I think that the Cro-Magnon, Neolithic. No, what is it? The Cro-Magnon tools are bone, much finer, things like needles. They find stuff that you can sew with, or they're probably toothpicks. They're probably not even needles. So yeah, just look up the tool culture of Clovis people. The only way out is in with regards to the elitist Christ quote. The interpretation of Christ could be different to the mainstream System A interpretation. For instance, some interpret it as the spiritual centers in the brain flowing with Kundalini released oil in brain in enlightenment. Yeah, but that would be, I suppose, to do with like System B interpretation of Christ. Yeah. So some groups interpret Christ in they interpret it as the viscera and the body of Christ rather than the words. If you're I suppose System A people are probably more likely to hold the words as important and to look at the the sort of to look up to the haloed figure of Christ, whereas perhaps the System B types are more likely to look into the psychology and the mind and body of Christ. Ralph Hexham, I think the Smithsonian is hiding information about them. Is that about the Clovis people again? The only way out is in which case it would be true, but not how the church has interpreted it in fake idol worship. Yeah, so idol. Yeah, that's a good point. Idol worship would be your System A, worshipping an individual point in time and space, rather than worshipping the space itself, or rather than worshipping infinity. And there's another thing that Gooch talks about in Personality and Evolution, where he says that the System A is very specific about how long things can go on for. So the Third Reich was described as the Reich that will last 1,000 years. So they actually put a time scale on it. Whereas System B classifies things as eternal and infinite. So the soul is eternal. The only way out is in. I was referring to Jesus saying the only way to God is through me. I.e. System B are more experiential rather than ethereal. Yeah, or ethereal. Ethereal. Yeah. System B are more experiential. Yeah, that's it. They're more living in the experience, and they are looking for a reason behind it or something like that. Yeah. Ralph Hexham, yeah, the Clovis people. Yeah, I think they're the Smithsonian definitely hiding a lot of stuff. Old Smithson, I think he was English, if I remember rightly. Smithson, maybe. I think he was like the son of the Duke of Northumberland or something when he fought for America. Something like that. That's a different subject anyway. Yeah, so some interesting stuff to ponder there. And we're getting into the sort of meat and potatoes of it all now, really. Or meat and veg, Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal. Yeah. So anyway, I'm gonna sign off now and see you all next week in focus, in the studio, and into the continuation of this chapter. I don't know how much we've got left actually. Let's have a look. Probably like another 10 pages or something before we get to part 5, the rise to tyranny of Western consciousness. So yeah, thanks everyone for showing up and showing out. And don't forget to smash the like button and then the share and blah blah blah, the rest of it. All right then. So I'll see you next week. Bye.